We've talked a lot about energy demand this morning. We'll hear a lot more about that as we go along. So where is all that energy coming from? Our next panel, or our next speaker, is going to be talking about the future of nuclear power. Cyril Draffin is the Senior Fellow for Advanced Nuclear with the U.S. Nuclear Industry Council. So, Cyril, welcome.
I'm Cyril Draffin. I'm Senior Fellow, as you heard, for the U.S. Nuclear Industry Council. We're a trade association with about 90 companies that are involved in developing nuclear power and also the supply chain. So it's good to talk about the future of nuclear power. We heard from Michelle that NJBIA wants to be 1, 2 to 3 steps ahead. Well, I think nuclear has that potential. Although it's been used extensively in New Jersey and elsewhere for baseload, there's an opportunity for the future. So what I'd like to talk about would be the role nuclear's played, both and what it could play with large reactors as well as small modular reactors, some of the challenges, and then a path forward in New Jersey where nuclear is part of the kind of all of the above strategy. But I thought I'd start with history, New Jersey history. This is Reverend William B. Wood. He is a Methodist minister. He was co-founder of Ocean City, New Jersey, 145 years ago. He was the first president of Ocean City Association, and he's also my great-great-grandfather. So this picture was on my grandmother's wall in Ocean City, New Jersey. So I have some long-term New Jersey ties, and there's a sense of history that New Jersey has had. And so what I'd like to do is, we've heard about South Energy Resources being 100 years old. Obviously, New Jersey has a long energy history even before that. So moving on to the nuclear fleet, also looking at history. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, the U.S. was #1 in the world in commercial nuclear power. We built more units than the rest of the world combined. And in fact, in 1974, we had 12 large reactors coming online in 1 year. And that was not an aberration. You can see how there were peaks, but there's a lot of plants being built. The regulations weren't as detailed, but the reliability and efficiency was there. And many of these plants have their life extended for 40 years, 60 years, 80 years. They were built well with reliability. But U.S. has stopped, partially because of natural gas being low in price, partially because of intense government regulations. Some regulators thought the best way to have a safe plant is not to build it. But in the meantime, China's been building. China has 55 operating nuclear power plants. They have 36 in the pipeline. We have more operating, but much less in the pipeline. France also has a large number of units operating and rely upon nuclear power. And for forthcoming, the next biggest one is India and Russia. So there's a lot of commitments around the world for large nuclear power plants, partially to address climate change, partially for price, partially for diversity. But if you don't put nuclear plants in India, they're going to burn coal. And the same thing's happening in China. They're building a lot of solar, but they're also building a lot of coal and nuclear. So the question for today is, can nuclear grow again in the United States? So this is a map of the 93 commercial operating power plants scattered around the country. A lot in the East Coast and Northeast. It's color-coded by which region they're in. And there's 2 in New Jersey, we've already heard from the leader of that company, in Salem and Hope Creek. But there's a lot of things happening recently, and I thought I'd touch upon that. You may have heard of 3 Mile Island. That had some history to it. Microsoft has now made a commitment to bring that plant back online. There's 2 units there. One, the safety systems worked, there's a meltdown, but it didn't operate after 1979, Unit 2. But Unit 1 operated very well, efficiently, reliably, but they had issues not from the operation side, but from the pricing side. And so they shut that down in 2019. Well, now it's seen as an asset. And so therefore, Microsoft is going to buy all the power for 20 years and bring it back online you heard about data centers and AI. Those companies, by the way, have money, and they're willing to spend it on clean energy sources, including nuclear. So Microsoft's an example where they're going to bring it back online, but it's not the only one. Palisades in Michigan got a loan guarantee from DOE, and Holtec, which is a Camden, New Jersey-based company and is the owner of that facility, plans on restarting it. And they hope to bring it back online as soon as the end of 2025. So, and again, a rebirth of an existing nuclear power plant. Earlier this year, Talon Energy, with money from Amazon, used the Susquehanna power and basically made a commitment to the Susquehanna nuclear power plant, which is not far away in Berwick, Pennsylvania, to operate that, focused on data centers and AI. So you see there's things happening, and as recently as yesterday, an announcement was made that Google has committed to Kairos Power to build 500 megawatts of nuclear power by 2035. That's significant because it's new nuclear. Not just new as in the facility hasn't been built, but it's new that it's in what's called 4th generation nuclear using molten salt. Now I'll mention the technology later, but that basically is a passively safe, more reliable operation with higher fuel in terms of higher intensity fuel, so it runs longer. And it's an example of new technology that large companies like Google are willing to commit to deploy. So we'll hear more about that later, but I thought it'd be good to sprinkle some technology in this talk. But you can't forget market forces. The Department of Energy looks at all kinds of different technologies. And just for interest, my personal background, when I started my career, I was with the Department of Energy. I asked to run a program, and that was directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing in Marcellus shales. That, after Devon Energy and Mitchell Energy, ended up turning into the gas fracking boom. I also got some of the early legislation done as incentives for tight gas sands. And then I switched over thinking solar was important, so I did the early work on how do you finance solar projects and worked with the industry on putting out a paper called Leasing the Sun. And recently I've been working with MIT on the energy initiative. So we all look at a broad swath of technologies that are available, and certainly the electric utilities we heard from this morning are doing the same thing. So this is a chart from the Department of Energy. They just put out a report it's called a Liftoff Report. And there's one of a series, and they're basically saying, how can you have a liftoff, like a rocket launch? How can you lift off of a new technology? In this case, it's advanced nuclear. And no government study would be complete without data, in this case, pictures. So if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the points, because it is a very useful report, and if anybody's interested in nuclear, I would encourage you to use it, and there's a link to that that's available at kind of the bottom of the page, and happy to make the slides available. So how do you read the chart? It looks at various technologies, nuclear, geothermal, hydro, renewables with this, and offshore and onshore and wind and natural gas and coal with CCS. And then it kind of evaluates, and just kind of a color code, like, does this make sense or not? And clean, that means no carbon, no small particulates. And you can see a number of, including nuclear, if you will, check the boxes and get a bright green or darker green, which is the best. And so there's a number that fit in that category. The second one is firm. You heard about reliability, the need for capacity factor, how that price has gone up. And I think PJM was undervaluing capacity factor, and now it's catching up with them, and those prices are going to be higher. And so firm is important. Nuclear is firm, coal with CCS, natural gas, those are also firm, but you need that as part of the mix. And if you get too far to renewables, there's an issue. There's also a question of lifetime. Solar systems, and there's people here who are involved in those, tend to last about 15 years. Tends to have about a 30% capacity factor based on NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory data. Wind has maybe a 20-year life and 30 to 40% capacity factor. Solar, at least nuclear, large nuclear, has an 93% capacity factor and has been 60, now heading on to 80 years. So why is that important? If you have to replace, if you have to repower a solar unit and basically have solar waste you have to dump and put new panels in, you might not get tax credit, but it's also part of the cost, which you don't have in nuclear. Same thing with wind. If you have to replace the nacelles and some of the turbines in 20 years, that's not 40 or 60 years. So something to consider. Land use, nuclear takes very little land. Transmission is, we've already talked about today. Concentrated local benefits means, is it sited in one place? There's a lot of construction at places. And direct heat. What I mean by direct heat is, what's the industrial applications that want to decarbonize? And if you are a refinery in Houston or a chemical plant and you don't want to rely upon natural gas, what are your alternatives? You can't really use electricity. These are high temperature, 600 degrees centigrade, high pressure steam applications, or even low pressure steam, but they're not electricity. Electricity is very inefficient for a refinery or a chemical plant. Nuclear offers that as an option. So let's look at cost. According to the same DOE study, if you have nuclear with renewables and storage, it decreases the cost of decarbonization by 37%. In other words, as you start getting higher renewables, you have a more unstable grid, and you need the firm baseline power. If you can't put gas in because it's carbon, you don't have that many options. And so their indication is that for grid planning, you really need nuclear, and it's cost effective. So we talked about some of the positives. Let's talk about the challenges. There's a number of them, and they include fuel. Some of the suppliers of uranium or the low-enriched fuel was Russia. That's obviously not very popular. And the US Congress has put in legislation to move funding to make low-enriched uranium in the United States. And so that's in the process of happening. They're also making what's called HALEU. Most fuel is 5% uranium. The movement is toward 10% uranium because it's much more efficient, not just twice as much, but even better than that. And they have special, it's called high, I won't go through the technical details, but they have high enriched uranium, and then they put them in little carbide pellets called TRISO fuel. Makes it very safe, makes it very reliable, and lets you run for many years, and it has lots of advantages. So DOE is putting $700 million into the HALEU and another $2.7 billion in low-enriched uranium just in the last year. You need to build out a supply chain, which is what our organization is working on. In terms of what do you do with the fuel, some people call it waste, other people call it a resource. It's 90% of the value is still there after it's been used in a reactor. France reprocesses it. Finland and Sweden plan on putting it in the ground and already have repositories underway. So why we're not doing it in the United States? It's a political issue. It's not a technical issue. The most serious issue is upfront costs. The Vogtle cost in Georgia was very high. There's been a number of studies, including by MIT, on why, and it's basically because we haven't built reactors for a long time. The Koreans are much better at building nuclear reactors, and the Chinese are better than building reactors than we are right now. The question is, can we get back to the 70s and 80s when we built a lot of them? Financing, could be addressed by some of the utilities, and particularly the data centers. And NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is speeding the licensing process and been having lots of discussions on how to do that. And I won't go through the details on it, but they've made pretty good progress in that regard. So what I'm going to do is cover a few more items and then take some questions. So this is for your reading pleasure, but it basically points out there's a lot of different technologies, and the coolants can be water, it can be gas, and it can be molten salt. So I'll highlight 4 of them. One, the second one down is GE Hitachi. That's being in the process of being evaluated for deployment by Ontario Power in Canada and also the Tennessee Valley Authority, as well as people in Eastern Europe. Fourth one down is Holtec. That's also water-based. I mentioned Holtec because they're located here in New Jersey. And they're, as I mentioned earlier, they're the ones that are going to try to bring back Palisades nuclear plant. They also have been working with Ukrainians for deploying smaller modular reactors. So these are mostly advanced nuclear small modular reactors, 300 megawatts in size rather than 1,000 megawatts in size. X Energy, just below that, is the one that signed with Dow Chemical. Dow Chemical plans on putting this high-temperature gas reactor in an industrial facility. And Kairos Power is the one that just signed an agreement recently with Google. And there's been bipartisan support for nuclear. So as we go forward, what are the things to consider? To increase success, you want standardization, you want them all to look alike. You don't want variations as we've had in the past. You want a separation between the nuclear island and the balance of plant. It's more efficient that way. You want modularization where they're built in factories where you can turn out 10s, 20s of them at a time. That was the Google idea. That's Department of Energy's idea. And there's industry groups that are getting together to see how you can buy that in bulk, because it's much more efficient if you put it in a factory, have quality control there, digital twins to make sure it's cost-effective and very reliable. And it's a lot cheaper to build it in a factory than stick-built, if they call it, in the field. And we've heard about financing already from it in terms of power purchase agreements. So advantage, nuclear is scalable, has resilience benefits, it can be used for industrial and for hydrogen. So let's wrap it up by bringing it close to home. In New Jersey, the goal is 100% clean energy by 2050. And you rely upon maybe nuclear for 35 to 40% of electricity in New Jersey. However, there's a stipulation that no new nuclear in New Jersey. Something to consider. A lot of other states are putting them in. A lot of states have changed. Probably more than half have already made commitments to build nuclear or to evaluate it as part of their state planning process. At a minimum, New Jersey ought to allow nuclear to be built, if it makes sense. You heard earlier from PS&G. The Salem plant's 2 units are operating very well in terms of reliable operations, licensed to 2036 and can be extended. And Hope Creek, a boiling water reactor, is licensed to 2046 and could also be extended. Some people thought about bringing back Oyster Creek. I know there's some political issues there, but the question is, how do you balance power versus environmental issues? I'm not going to weigh in on what the right answer is. That's for you as policy people to decide. So industrial applications, utility applications, and in manufacturing, I again mentioned in Camden, New Jersey, we have Holtec. So it's important to consider nuclear as part of multi-decade resource planning. So I'd like to pause there and see if we have a few minutes for questions for those of you who have either are eager to hear more or confused. Whatever there. And also you could be thinking about, I won't necessarily ask you for a show of hands, of how many people think that nuclear is likely to grow in New Jersey or in the US over the next decade? You can mull that over, okay? How many people think it's going to stay flat or go down? So it's about 99% on one path. I think that is changing of a lot of the states, and I think that actually is typical of what people are thinking about. I think they had a question over here.
Yeah. Hi. So you brought up earlier about how a lot of the new nuclear developments, or at least the ones that have been put forward by Google and Microsoft, they're more of the small modular reactors. Do you think that's the way going forward for the rest of the world as well, to move towards more of these small modular reactors that have smaller megawatt production?
The main thing limiting small modular, well, there's two things limiting small modular reactors. One is they're not operating yet. They operated back in the 70s as test reactors, but they're not online yet. And a number of utilities and industrial organizations say, like, I'd like to be second or third. I don't want to be first. But as you're getting commitments from Google and the rest of them to actually build these and operating, Kairos is doing a good job of step-by-step development. That's what Google signed up for. So I think that's going to be overcome in terms of operations. In terms of cost, the general assessment is that they are about 30% more expensive than the very large ones that if are well built. But the problem is you have to be efficient in building those large units. And in small modular reactors, if you use a factory, you the price down, and therefore you may save that, and also helps in financing, and you can put in unit 1, then unit 2, unit 3 for an SMR, and so it helps deployment. And particularly for industrial, where they probably don't want to buy 1,000 megawatt, but 300 would be about their size. One question in the middle? And I think this will be the last question, so I'm sure it's going to be a good one.
What about the thermal attributes of nuclear? So nuclear is really a thermal technology, and we talked this morning about the massive thermal needs and electrification and the issues there. You know, are you looking at nuclear as a thermal solution, not just an electric solution?
Yes. So as an example, I had put on a workshop down in Houston earlier this year. We had 12 people from the chemical industry, biggest chemical companies, and 12 people from oil and gas, and they're going through detailed designs for putting nuclear in for process heat, or more likely steam. And so the answer is, in the industrial side, yes. For the data centers, probably not. They're interested in electricity, so they really want the large ones. So I think there's going to be a striation in the industry between where you have deployments. And then for the micro reactors, there's interest in the oil and gas industry for putting that in the field. They're interested in the U.S. government for putting that in for fixed military bases or mobile military bases. So there's going to be different applications for different types, different technology sizes. Great, so sure, thank you.